Right. I remember specifically, you know, I never had anything taken from me, but I've also kind of grown up in the ghetto, so I knew better than to leave anything lying around. I always had everything like right in my pockets, right up to my chest, and you know that's why the camera I bought is so small, is so that I can easily take care of it, and you know, so. But
my pack never left my back.
Right. And that's just it's a different environment, and it takes a slow toll on the people that are there, in the same way that it does to veterans in war. And it's going to create situations where, you know, people outside of that are not necessarily going to understand where you're coming from. And I think that if people want to be involved, you know, make it out there as much as you can. And if you can't, don't be angry at the ones who can, making decisions that they didn't bother to consult you about. That was another thing that was a strange dichotomy with the General Assemblies, is that you would have situations where General Assemblies want to dictate camp policy, but a great deal of the people that were in the General Assemblies didn't camp. So it makes the General Assembly feel oppressive, because now we have these groups of people who aren't out here, who are not really part of this family as it's, you know, as it is, at least not immediate family. I mean, everybody at Occupy felt like family. There was never a question there. But it was almost like, you know, maybe your uncle and, you know, your cousins are coming over to your house and telling you what's going on. You still care about them, but you can't help but resent that.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. You know, we still have love for all the other groups and working groups and participants, and General Assembly, and you know, Unite Detroit has broken off from General Assembly because of these factors, and we didn't want to be dictated to by people not participating in the same activities, because it just is plain not fair. Additionally, there were groups more recently acting to subvert our efforts, by organizing and bringing in people from out of town to set up voting blocks to impede the work we were doing, because they had an ideological difference with our desire to use private space. It was their contention that the movement was nothing if it didn't hold the park, and my contention was, if you would like to hold the park, you're welcome to it, but I had hit burnout, and I voted with my feet, and decided that I could be more effective as an activist if I didn't have to stay up till 4 every morning fighting crackheads. So, you know, I voted with my feet. Many others that I'd been working very closely with, but in other working groups, very rapidly followed suit. And we formed an affinity group and have been self-directing and attempting to provide resources to the Occupy Detroit movement. But it is my feeling, and the feeling of many others, that your participation is what matters the most, and that we don't want to be dictated to by people not participating in the same efforts. So that was the basis of the schism in this city, and from what I'm hearing, this is something that is happening nationally. New York has had a similar division, and so is Oakland and many other cities.
I'm finding it also, it's a global problem. It's the same thing in Canada, it's the same thing in Sweden, it's the same thing in England. You know, and I think that I really hope that we can overcome this, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing some of these shows and these videos.
I definitely believe that we can overcome this, and we're working to overcome it. That's part of the reason, though, why we needed to break off and function under our own autonomous authority. And I think it should be encouraged for all people to remember that while we are all participants in a large movement, and that this really stems from our autonomous drive to accomplish good works, and that we have to maintain our freedom, and we have to maintain a level of autonomy, because this is about social justice and about freedom. And so if we're living under a consensus-based dictatorship, that's not going to work.
Right.
So, yeah, we can overcome these divisions, but it's gonna take. We all need to check ourselves, and we all need to examine whether we're working out of a spirit of collaboration and compassion, or whether we're functioning off the basis of our ego. And narcissism, I think, is one of the roots of bad behavior throughout all societies. So that's where we need to check ourselves.
For sure. Now, I mean, to kind of go back a little bit on the idea that there were these groups of people that felt that the movement was nothing unless it was camping in the camp and occupying the camp. I mean, from what I understand, that's kind of like an outside group of people who were not occupying anyway, who kind of, well, all right, well, you guys all need to stay here, and we're going to General Assembly until you all stay here. But they weren't, I mean, there were some people who did want to stay, and for the most part that I saw, they were all pretty mellow about it. They weren't expecting to force anyone else. It's kind of the issue of like the thing that was kind of dropped on the floor about it that I don't think anybody was facing was, okay, great, you want to stay here, well, go get a tent and move in, because you weren't here anyway. So for you to be upset with us because we're leaving, but you're not coming to stay is kind of silly. It's not you who's going to get arrested. It's not you who's to deal with the homeless drug addicts or whatever that's coming up. And once again, I notice I said homeless drug addicts. I don't have a problem with homeless people. And in fact, I've met several people involved with this movement who are homeless that are awesome. But,
oh yeah, we've brought in a lot of homeless people who have been critical to everything we've achieved. And I bear no one any ill will because of their lack of housing.
Right.
I think that's a major problem, and they're some of the most affected people by the corrupt and broken system. Mm-hmm. And so we definitely need to maintain compassion for them and welcome them into the ranks. But that doesn't include disruptive drug addicts who. Right. Who, I've dealt with a lot of crack and heroin addicts throughout various periods of my life, and it's became rapidly clear to me that their first motivation and their first loyalty is to their addiction above and beyond any and everything else, and you can rely on them to behave in accordance with that. And that is the only sense in which they are reliable. Right.
Now, but back to that central issue, it was it was a little absurd to hear groups of people insisting that, we must occupy and then we suck if we don't occupy when they weren't occupying. Do you remember any dialogue along that line? Did anybody tell them?
Yeah, I had several very heated discussions with a guy who's from an organization called BAM, and they have a history of being instigators and provocateurs in various movements, and I know from some of my leftist friends some of the things that they've done in the past, which are, in my opinion, completely despicable behavior, like getting a bunch of young, inexperienced students all riled up and on the opposite side of a picket line from some police, and then throwing M80s at the police and splitting while the police come and kick everyone's ass. That kind of behavior is not at all in line with the nonviolent stance of this movement, and it's in no way acceptable to the doctrine of this movement. And so a lot of the people that wanted to stay in the park, the express purpose for wanting to stay in the park was that they thought that fighting the cops would bring more people to the movement. but their intent was to have violent conflict with police. And my contention was then, and always has been, that the police are a part of the 99%. And particularly Detroit police. I mean, these guys work for almost nothing, and as of a couple of weeks ago, are now taking an additional 10% pay cut. They're working in one of the most dangerous environments possible in a civil society. I mean, a lot of people that live here in the city of Detroit kind of say, tongue in cheek, that if the world came to an end, I'm not sure we'd notice. Because, we're standing in crumble.
Right.
Society isn't on the brink of collapse here. We don't have neighbors anymore in this city that know each other. There is no community, and most neighborhoods are neighborhoods in name, not in spirit. And so, one of the major drives in this movement, if we want to succeed in Detroit, is going to be the reestablishment of that community.
That's awesome. And I think that you're very much right about that. I remember when I was growing up in Pontiac, very violent city in Michigan, when the Columbine thing happened. I remember very distinctly, some of my schoolmates were like, so a bunch of white kids shoot each other, and now it's this huge national sensation that we're all talking about, but this stuff happens in our neighborhood all the time and nobody cares.
Yeah.
It kind of brings to light the fact that the violent state of the world in other places where the economy is bad is like an elephant in the room that everyone's just trying to pretend is not there. But I want to thank you again, Nathan, for being on. And, for those of you who've just watched the video, be sure to check in on the audio account I did on the same thing. Thanks, Nathan.
No problem.